In this podcast episode, Sir Bill Browder shares his extraordinary journey from being a capitalist investor in post-Soviet Russia to becoming a human rights activist dedicated to fighting corruption and injustice under Vladimir Putin's regime. Browder recounts his early experiences in Russia's chaotic privatization era, his confrontation with Russian oligarchs and the Kremlin, the tragic death of his lawyer Sergey Magnitsky, and the origins and global impact of the Magnitsky Act. The conversation also explores Putin's motivations behind his leadership style and the invasion of Ukraine, the nature of the Russian regime, and how the West should approach the ongoing conflict. Browder begins with his unique background as the grandson of Earl Browder, an American communist leader who had deep ties to Moscow and later faced persecution during the McCarthy era. Born in 1964, Bill grew up wrestling with this legacy, rebelling in youthful ways before ultimately embracing capitalism. He graduated from Stanford Business School in 1989, the same year the Berlin Wall fell, and decided to become a capitalist pioneer in Eastern Europe, particularly Russia. Browder's entry into Russia coincided with the chaotic mass privatization program initiated by Boris Yeltsin's government, which sold billions of dollars of state assets at absurdly low prices. Beginning as an advisor at Salomon Brothers and later founding the Hermitage Fund, Browder quickly realized the vast opportunity amid systemic lawlessness. By the late 1990s, his fund was the best-performing investment vehicle worldwide, growing to manage $1 billion in assets. Following Russia's 1998 financial collapse, the oligarchs, wealthy businessmen controlling major industries, embarked on unprecedented looting of companies through fraud and asset stripping. Browder witnessed firsthand how Russia's institutions, including courts and police, were incapable or unwilling to enforce rule of law. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin was consolidating power and initially appeared to stand against the oligarchs, removing corrupt management in state companies, which temporarily lifted share prices. This phase of relative optimism ended when Putin arrested Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the richest oligarch and owner of Yukos. Browder reveals a chilling revelation. Putin demanded a 50% cut from the oligarchs for himself personally, not for the state or government. This marked the moment Putin became the richest man in the world and signaled a dangerous turn for Browder, who refused to cooperate or pay up. Consequently, Browder became an enemy to the Kremlin. In retaliation, Russian authorities raided Browder's offices and law firms, illegally seizing company documents and fraudulently re-registering his investment companies under the names of criminals. Browder's remaining team was evacuated for safety, and all assets were sold to avoid further loss. The police and officials engaged in criminal actions, all seemingly with implicit or explicit support from the highest levels of government. Browder hired Sergey Magnitsky, a brilliant Russian lawyer, to investigate the theft and fraud against his fund. Magnitsky uncovered a massive $230 million tax refund scam implicating corrupt officials. Contrary to their hopes, Magnitsky's legal complaints led to his arrest, torture, and eventual death after months of imprisonment without medical care. His ordeal exposed the brutal nature of Putin's Russia and shattered any illusions about justice within the system. Devastated by Magnitsky's death, Browder committed himself to seeking justice. Recognizing that Russian courts were complicit in corruption, he advocated for international measures to punish those responsible. He worked with U.S. Senators Benjamin Cardin and John McCain to enact legislation freezing assets and banning travel for corrupt Russian officials. The Magnitsky Act passed overwhelmingly in the U.S. Congress in 2012, marking a historic effort to hold human rights violators accountable globally. The Magnitsky Act has since been adopted by 35 countries, including Canada, the UK, and the European Union, creating a coordinated international framework to sanction abusers of human rights and corruption worldwide. Browder believes this law acts as a deterrent, forcing kleptocrats to think twice about committing abuses if they risk losing their illicit wealth and access abroad. It has sparked intense anger from Putin, who responded with retaliatory measures, such as banning U.S. adoptions of Russian orphans. A critical theme throughout the discussion is the West's failure to fully grasp Putin's character and the nature of Russia's regime. Both Browder and Magnitsky were initially naive, believing that elements within the system might act to uphold justice or protect them. Browder stresses that Putin is a sociopath, driven by self-preservation, with no genuine interest in public service or the national interest. Western leaders often misinterpret his motives through a Western lens, expecting negotiation or rational compromise, which will never occur. Browder asserts that the invasion of Ukraine is primarily motivated by Putin's personal need for survival rather than geopolitical reasoning. Having stolen an estimated $1 trillion alongside his cronies, Putin fears internal revolt and unrest. To distract and unite his people, he manufactures foreign enemies, applying classic Machiavellian tactics. The war fuels nationalist sentiment and legitimizes repression, but comes at the cost of international sanctions and isolation. Because Putin cannot leave power without risking imprisonment or worse, he must perpetuate conflict and maintain a narrative that justifies his rule. The war acts as a tool to suppress dissent and justify brutal measures at home. Despite the immense costs and shrinking resources, Putin will likely continue the conflict indefinitely to remain in control, risking further devastation akin to North Korea's prolonged isolation. Browder advocates for a firmer stance from the West in supporting Ukraine, arguing that supplying sufficient resources could allow Ukraine to decisively defeat Putin's forces. He believes the logic of deterrence and negotiation fails because Putin is indifferent to diplomacy and solely focused on clinging to power. Browder foresees a protracted conflict resembling the Korean War, with a frozen front line and unresolved tensions, unless Putin is removed. Browder underlines the profound disconnect between Putin's sociopathic worldview and Western expectations for leadership and diplomacy. The Russian leadership operates through zero-sum power dynamics and totalitarian control rather than democratic negotiation. Recognizing this harsh reality is essential for crafting effective policies. Browder's story not only exposes systemic corruption and human rights abuses, but vividly illustrates the costs of underestimating such a regime and the men behind it.